Imagine a world where the human soul is a battleground, a place where the divine and the abysmal wrestle for supremacy. This is the terrain where Carl Jung and Friedrich Nietzsche meet, not as friends, but as intellectual titans, clashing over the nature of spirituality and meaning. Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, saw the psyche as a vast, mysterious ocean, teeming with archetypes and symbols that connect us to something eternal. Nietzsche, the German philosopher, gazed into that same ocean and declared it a void, proclaiming the death of God and challenging humanity to forge its own purpose. Their ideas, born from the turbulence of modernity, offer two radically different maps for navigating the human condition. Jung's is a journey inward, toward integration in the sacred. Nietzsche's is a defiant march outward, into a godless expanse where we must become creators. This script isn't just a comparison, it's a psychological odyssey, a dive into how these two thinkers grappled with the eternal questions. Who are we? Why are we here? And what happens when the old gods fall silent? Let's begin by stepping into Jung's world, where the psyche itself is a cathedral of meaning. Jung believed that spirituality wasn't just a relic of religion. It was a fundamental instinct woven into the fabric of the human mind. He saw the psyche as layered, like an ancient city built upon ruins. At its deepest level lay the collective unconscious, a reservoir of shared human experience stretching back to our primordial ancestors. Here, archetypes, universal patterns like the hero, the mother, or the wise old man, shape our dreams, myths, and even our neuroses. For Jung, God wasn't an external deity perched in the heavens, but an archetype, a symbol of wholeness in the self, projected outward by the psyche's need to understand itself. This wasn't atheism masquerading as mysticism. It was a bold redefinition of the divine. Jung argued that when we strip away the dogma of organized religion, we're left with a psychological reality. The longing for transcendence is as innate as hunger or fear. His patients, plagued by modern disconnection, often found healing not in pills or platitudes, but in reconnecting with these inner symbols, through dreams, art, or visions. To Jung, spirituality was the psyche's way of whispering its own salvation, a call to integrate the fragmented self into something greater. Nietzsche, on the other hand, would have scoffed at Jung's cathedral of the psyche. Where Jung saw a sacred architecture, Nietzsche saw a crumbling ruin, and he relished swinging the wrecking ball. His infamous declaration, "God is dead," wasn't a gleeful taunt, but a grim diagnosis of a cultural sickness. For Nietzsche, the collapse of Christian morality in the wake of science and reason left humanity orphaned, staring into an abyss of meaninglessness. But he didn't despair. He roared. He believed this death was an opportunity, a brutal liberation from the shackles of superstition. If God was gone, then we, the living, must become gods ourselves. This is the heart of his Übermensch, the overman, a figure who doesn't kneel to archetypes but forges new values from the ashes of the old. Nietzsche's spirituality, if we can call it that, wasn't about transcendence in Jung's sense. It was about immanence, about seizing this world, this life, with both hands and sculpting it into something extraordinary. The psyche for him wasn't a temple, but a forge, and meaning wasn't found, it was made. Let's pause here and consider the stakes. Jung and Nietzsche weren't just theorizing in ivory towers, they were responding to a world unmoored. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a crucible of change. Industrial revolutions, wars, and the erosion of faith left people adrift. Jung, practicing psychiatry in Zurich, saw this in his patients, men and women haunted by a sense of emptiness, their souls starving for something science couldn't provide. He believed this hunger stemmed from a disconnect with the collective unconscious, a severance from the myths and symbols that once gave life structure. Nietzsche, writing decades earlier, had foreseen this crisis. He warned that killing God would leave us with a void we weren't ready to fill, predicting a century of nihilism, a prophecy that, by Jung's time, seemed eerily prescient. Yet their solutions diverged sharply. Jung wanted to resurrect meaning through the psyche's depths. Nietzsche demanded we abandon the crutches of the past and leap into the unknown. Both saw the problem, but their prescriptions were as different as a priest's prayer and a warrior's battle cry. Jung's approach was deeply personal, almost tender. He didn't just theorize, he lived his ideas, descending into his own psyche during a period of near madness after his break with Freud. In his Red Book, a private journal of visions and dialogues with inner figures, he wrestled with the divine and the demonic within himself. He emerged with a conviction: the individual must confront their shadow, the dark, repressed side of the self, and integrate it to become whole. This process, which he called individuation, was spiritual at its core. It wasn't about obeying a distant God, but about becoming one's truest self, a self that mirrored the divine archetype of the self. For Jung, spirituality was a psychological necessity, not a luxury. Without it, we're condemned to live half-lives, split between the masks we wear and the depths we ignore. His patients' dreams, he found, often carried religious imagery: crosses, mandalas, serpents, not because they were devout, but because their psyches were crying out for reconciliation with something larger than the ego. Nietzsche's vision was anything but tender. It was ferocious, intoxicating, and unapologetic. He didn't journal his dissent, he bellowed it in works like Thus Spoke Zarathustra. His Zarathustra, a prophet-like figure, descends from the mountains to preach the Übermensch and the eternal recurrence, the idea that life repeats infinitely, challenging us to live each moment as if we'd choose it forever. This wasn't a cozy spirituality of self-discovery, but a gauntlet thrown at humanity's feet. Nietzsche rejected the notion of a collective unconscious binding us to the past. He saw the past as a burden, a spirit of gravity dragging us down. His psyche was a battlefield, not a cathedral, where the will to power, the drive to assert one's existence, reigned supreme. Spirituality in his hands became a creative act, a refusal to bow to anything outside the self. Where Jung sought harmony, Nietzsche embraced strife, believing that only through struggle could we transcend our animal nature and touch something sublime. Not in heaven, but here, in the dirt and fire of life. Now let's bring these two into the same room, metaphorically speaking. Imagine Jung, with his gentle curiosity, asking Nietzsche why he denies the soul's need for the divine. Nietzsche, pacing like a caged lion, might retort that Jung's archetypes are just ghosts of dead gods, chains disguised as wisdom. Jung could counter that Nietzsche's Übermensch is itself an archetype, a projection of the hero inflated to cosmic proportions. Nietzsche would laugh, harshly perhaps, and accuse Jung of cowardice, of retreating into the psyche instead of facing the void. This clash isn't just academic, it's visceral because it mirrors a tension within us all. Do we seek meaning in the echoes of the past, as Jung suggests, or do we burn the past to light our own way, as Nietzsche demands? Psychologically, they're wrestling with the same beast, the human need for purpose. Jung sees it as a thread connecting us to eternity. Nietzsche sees it as a rope we must weave ourselves. Their dialogue is a mirror, reflecting our own struggles to find footing in a world that often feels like quicksand. Jung's spirituality has a warmth that Nietzsche's lacks, a sense of hope rooted in the idea that we're not alone in our search. His collective unconscious implies a shared humanity, a lineage of symbols that transcends time and culture. When he analyzed myths, Greek, Norse, or Indian, he found the same patterns: the trickster, the flood, the dying god. To him, this wasn't coincidence, but evidence of a psychic unity, a deep well we all draw from. Spirituality, then, becomes a bridge, not just within the self, but between us. A patient dreaming of a mandala wasn't just healing herself, she was tapping into a current that flowed through ancient temples and modern minds alike. Jung's optimism lay in this connectivity. Even in a secular age, the psyche could still whisper truths the conscious mind had forgotten. His work suggests that spirituality isn't dead. It's dormant, waiting to be awakened by those brave enough to listen to their inner voices, to dive into the chaos of their dreams and emerge with something whole. Nietzsche, by contrast, would see Jung's bridges as prisons. His spirituality, if we dare call it that, was solitary, defiant, and proud. He didn't want unity, he wanted singularity. The eternal recurrence wasn't a comforting cycle, but a test. Could you affirm your life with all its pain and glory, without leaning on myths or gods? His will to power wasn't about dominating others, but mastering oneself, sculpting the raw clay of existence into a masterpiece. Where Jung saw the shadow as something to integrate, Nietzsche might say it's something to overcome, or even to wield. His psyche wasn't a cathedral or a well, but a volcano, erupting with creative force. This isn't to say he lacked depth. His writing pulses with an anguished love for life, a yearning to see humanity rise above its pettiness. But his spirituality demanded we stand alone, rejecting the crutches of tradition or collective dreams. For Nietzsche, meaning wasn't a gift from the psyche, it was a conquest, a crown forged in the heat of existence. Let's zoom out and consider their psychological legacies. Jung's ideas birthed a lineage of therapy, analytical psychology, that still thrives today. Therapists guide clients through their unconscious, using dreams and symbols to unearth buried truths. His spirituality resonates in a world obsessed with mindfulness and self-discovery, where people seek the sacred in meditation apps or yoga retreats. He offers a soft landing for those disillusioned by religion, a way to keep the numinous without the dogma. Nietzsche's influence, meanwhile, cuts a sharper edge. His shadow looms over existentialism, inspiring thinkers like Sartre and Camus to wrestle with absurdity and freedom. His call to create meaning echoes in art, literature, and even pop culture. Think of the tortured genius who rejects convention to blaze their own trail. Psychologically, he challenges us to confront our fears of nothingness, to find strength in our solitude. Both men, in their own ways, shaped how we understand the psyche's hunger for something beyond the mundane, one through reconnection, the other through reinvention. But what happens when we pit their views against the modern psyche? Today, we're flooded with data, distracted by screens, and often numb to the big questions. Jung might argue that our obsession with technology is a symptom of spiritual starvation, a flight from the unconscious into the shallow waters of the ego. He'd point to the rise of conspiracy theories or fandoms as distorted archetypes, the psyche's desperate attempt to mythologize a fragmented world. Nietzsche, meanwhile, might see our digital age as the ultimate test of the Übermensch. He'd ask, can we master this chaos or will we drown in it? Will we use these tools to create new values or just scroll through the wreckage of the old ones? Both would agree we're at a crossroads, but Jung would urge us to look inward for salvation, while Nietzsche would demand we look outward and build it. Their psychologies don't just diagnose us. They dare us to respond, to choose between the cathedral and the forge. Jung's spirituality feels like a balm in this context. His emphasis on the collective unconscious offers a sense of belonging, a reminder that even in our isolation, we're part of something ancient and vast. His patients often found peace in symbols, a cross in a dream, a circle drawn in therapy, that tethered them to a larger story. He believed the psyche could heal itself if given the chance, that spirituality was less about belief and more about experience. In a world where anxiety and depression soar, Jung's ideas suggest a quiet revolution. Turn off the noise, listen to the soul, and let it guide you home. His approach is democratic. Anyone can dream, anyone can draw a mandala. It's a spirituality for the everyman, rooted in the psyche's natural rhythms. Yet it's not without its critics, who might say it's too passive, too nostalgic, clinging to a past Nietzsche would gladly torch. Does it risk keeping us tethered to archetypes when we need to break free? Nietzsche's response would be a thunderclap. He'd see our modern malaise not as a cry for connection, but as a failure of will. We're not lost because we've forgotten the gods. We're lost because we haven't replaced them. His eternal recurrence looms over us like a judge. Are we living lives worth reliving, or are we just drifting? His spirituality is a call to arms, a demand that we stop whining and start creating. In a world of influencers and algorithms, he'd cheer the rare soul who defies the herd, who carves meaning from the noise. Psychologically, this is empowering but brutal. It offers no safety net, no collective embrace. Nietzsche's psyche is a lone peak, not a shared valley. His critics, including Jung, might argue he overlooks our need for community, our fragility. Can we all be Übermenschen, or is that a fantasy for the strong, leaving the weak to wither? Let's explore this tension through a psychological lens. Jung's archetypes suggest the psyche craves structure, patterns that give chaos form. His spirituality is stabilizing, a counterweight to modernity's disarray. When a patient dreamed of a snake eating its tail, Jung saw the Ouroboros, a symbol of eternity and renewal, and helped them find peace in that cycle. His work implies the psyche is conservative, preserving what's essential even as the world shifts. Nietzsche's will to power, conversely, suggests the psyche thrives on disruption. He'd see that same snake as a challenge, to break the cycle, to assert oneself against fate. His spirituality is revolutionary, urging the psyche to evolve beyond its instincts. Both views hold truth. We seek order, yet we also yearn to transcend it. The question is balance. Do we integrate the past, as Jung advises, or shatter it, as Nietzsche insists? The modern psyche, torn between nostalgia and innovation, wrestles with this daily. Now picture a dream. A man stands at a crossroads, one path lined with ancient statues, the other a blazing wilderness. Jung might say it's the self-calling, offering a choice between heritage and chaos. Nietzsche might say it's a test of courage, daring the man to burn the statues and walk the fire. This dream could be ours, a metaphor for the spiritual split these thinkers embody. Jung's path promises depth, a dialogue with the soul's history. Nietzsche's promises freedom, a chance to author our destiny. Psychologically, both are vital. Jung heals the fractured self, knitting it back to the eternal. Nietzsche ignites the dormant self, pushing it to new heights. Neither is wrong. They're incomplete without each other. A psyche that only integrates risks stagnation. One that only creates risks isolation. Perhaps the true spirituality lies in the tension, in holding both the cathedral and the forge without letting either collapse. Let's ground this in a real-world example. Take addiction, a plague of the modern psyche. Jung might see it as a spiritual crisis, a disconnection from the self that drives someone to numb the pain with substances. He'd look to the addict's dreams for clues, perhaps a drowning figure, crying for rescue by the hero archetype. His therapy would guide them inward, seeking the symbol that restores wholeness. Nietzsche might see addiction as a failure of will, a surrender to weakness instead of a triumph over it. He'd challenge the addict to affirm life, to find a purpose worth fighting for, even if it meant suffering. Both approaches have merit. Jung's offers compassion, Nietzsche's offers grit. Studies show recovery often blends both, a sense of belonging, Jung, and a drive to redefine oneself, Nietzsche. The psyche, it seems, needs both the anchor and the sail, a lesson these thinkers teach us, even in their rivalry. Their views on suffering further illuminate this divide. Jung saw suffering as a signal, a call from the unconscious to confront the shadow. In his own life, he endured visions of blood and death during World War I, interpreting them as collective cries echoing in his psyche. Spirituality for him was the process of turning pain into growth, of finding the gold in the dark. Nietzsche saw suffering as a forge, not a signal. In his own chronic illness, he wrote of amor fati, love of fate, embracing pain as the raw material of greatness. His spirituality was about saying yes to life, even its thorns. Psychologically, both resonate. We need meaning to endure suffering, Jung, but also the strength to face it head-on, Nietzsche. Together, they suggest a spirituality that neither denies pain nor drowns in it, a dynamic dance between acceptance and defiance. Let's widen the lens to culture. Jung's spirituality aligns with traditions that honor the past. Think of indigenous rituals or Eastern mysticism, where symbols bind communities to the eternal. His psyche is a tapestry, woven from threads of history. Nietzsche's aligns with modernity's rupture. Think of avant-garde art or punk rock, where the old is raised to birth the new. His psyche is a canvas, painted in bold, solitary strokes. Both reflect human impulses, to preserve and to destroy, to connect and to individuate. Psychologically, cultures thrive when they balance these. Too much Jung, and we stagnate in nostalgia. Too much Nietzsche, and we fracture into chaos. The 20th century, with its wars and revolutions, showed both at play, Jung's archetypes and propaganda, Nietzsche's will in rebellion. Today, our global psyche teeters between these poles, seeking a spirituality that can hold both. What about the individual in this cosmic tug-of-war? Jung offers a spirituality of reflection. Sit with your dreams, ask what they mean, and let the psyche guide you. It's slow, patient, introspective. Nietzsche offers one of action: rise, create, and don't look back. It's fast, bold, relentless. Psychologically, we oscillate between these modes. Some days we need Jung's quiet to make sense of our mess. Others we need Nietzsche's fire to break free of it. A healthy psyche, perhaps, is ambidextrous, able to delve and to leap. Their clash isn't a zero-sum game, but a spectrum, and where we fall depends on the moment. Spirituality, then, isn't a fixed state, but a rhythm, pulsing between the depths we inherit and the heights we pursue. Let's imagine a synthesis, not a compromise, but a dialogue. Jung might say to Nietzsche, "Your Übermensch is an archetype, a myth reborn. Why deny its roots?" Nietzsche might reply, "Your archetypes are tools, not truths. Why not wield them to build anew?" Together, they'd craft a spirituality where the psyche honors its past while shaping its future. Psychologically, this feels right. We're creatures of memory and ambition, tethered yet free. Jung's collective unconscious could feed Nietzsche's will to power, giving it raw material. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence could test Jung's individuation, giving it urgency. The cathedral becomes the forge a cathedral, a space where meaning is both discovered and made. This isn't just theory, it's a blueprint for living in a world where old gods fade, but new ones haven't yet risen. Consider the artist as a case study. Jung might see their work as a dialogue with the unconscious, Picasso's minotaurs or Dali's melting clocks as archetypes bleeding onto canvas. Spirituality here is revelation, the psyche unveiling itself. Nietzsche might see the same artist as a creator defying convention, shattering norms to birth something original. Spirituality here is assertion, the psyche claiming its power. Both are true. The artist draws from a well, Jung, and digs a new one, Nietzsche. Psychologically, creativity mirrors this duality. It's a dance of inheritance and invention. The artist's struggle, madness, doubt, triumph, echoes the broader human quest for meaning. Jung and Nietzsche don't just explain this. They amplify it, offering lenses to see the psyche's wild beauty. Let's end where we began, with the soul as a battleground. Jung and Nietzsche don't resolve this fight, they arm us for it. Jung gives us a compass, pointing to the eternal within. Nietzsche gives us a sword, cutting through illusions to the now. Their spiritualities, one rooted in the psyche's depths, the other in its peaks, aren't opposites, but poles of the same magnet, pulling us toward meaning. Psychologically, they remind us that the human mind is vast, capable of both reverence and rebellion. In a world still reeling from God's death, still searching for purpose, they offer no easy answers, but they do offer tools. Jung's is a lantern for the dark, Nietzsche's is a hammer for the stone. Together, they challenge us to explore the psyche, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a mystery to live. One where spirituality is both our inheritance and our creation.